This webinar, brought to you by University of Houston Continuing Education, originally aired on February 9th, 2010. This is Performance Management. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. For more information, visit uh.edu/empower. Program. Welcome to Performance Management. An ounce of prevention is versus a pound of cure. This webinar is being brought to you for free by the University of Houston Continuing Education as a part of our Empower Leadership Development Program. My name is Guy Felder, and I'm the Director of Professional Development Programs at the University of Houston, and I'll be facilitating the webinar today. I'm also joined by Aubrey Bloom, who will be coordinating. During this presentation, I'll leave chat disabled until the end when we take questions. Also, voice chat will be disabled for this webinar as well. This webinar is being delivered through our WIMBA online classroom system, which is one of our delivery methods for continuing education. I do have a slight cold today, so I'll try to remember to hit the mute button if I have a cough. If I forget to, let me apologize for that in advance. Before we get started, I want to highlight two upcoming programs that much of the content of this webinar was derived from. First, our Leadership Fundamentals Certificate Program. This program introduces you to leadership development and gives you valuable tools to take back to the ranch, as they say, and begin using at work. It's a great program. I sometimes get to teach the first 6 hours on leadership versus management, and the class starts later this month, as you can see. Second is our Coaching Tools Fundamentals, which is the first class in our Coaching Tools for Leaders Certificate program. And this class is geared towards those who already have leadership training and experience, and it helps you refine your abilities and learn some amazing performance-driven tools. I took this class over the summer for the first time and was really impressed with it, and it's probably been one of the most effective programs in delivering me some high-level management tools that I've really been able to take advantage of. If you want more information about these classes or any of our other offerings, you can visit uh.edu/empower. Now, I'm going to go ahead and, well, as you can tell, those have just come in. Chat is disabled. However, you can communicate with Aubrey if you have issues. So without further delay, let's go ahead and start the webinar. On our agenda today, we're going to talk about performance management and a specific area of performance management. We're going to talk about why we ignore performance management early on. We'll be discussing the reasons for ignoring performance, trends in underperformance, normal activators for performance management, problems with dealing with performance late instead of early, who is really at fault for poor performance, and tools for correcting performance, and then finally, we'll conclude with questions. So really, the notion of this webinar is an old adage by Benjamin Franklin. That is, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And effective performance management can be one of the largest consumers of a manager's or organization's resources. Performance management done poorly can take over the work life of a manager. And in this webinar, we'll be discussing some of the most common mistakes managers make when it comes to performance management and how to take a prevention-oriented approach and how that can free up time and resources for managers and their organizations. Because I assume most of you are like me as a manager. You have a lot of other things you do besides managing people. So oftentimes what we see is that performance issues are erosive, meaning that the changes are subtle and often can go unaddressed. So why do we let performance issues go unaddressed? Well, first, we do not notice it. Performance drops sometimes are so slow that we just don't perceive it, or we forget that the employee was once performing at a higher level. If you're like me, you have about 5 million other things going on in your workday, and oftentimes we just don't notice performance has begun to suffer. The second reason, I think this is a big one, we feel the effort and potential discomfort of addressing the performance issue is not worth it. This is a big one. I hear it over and over again. Oftentimes people say, you know, it's just too difficult to pull out the big form. I don't want to get HR involved just because someone was late. I just don't want to go through the whole process and deal with all of the negative things associated with correcting performance. Thirdly, we believe the problem will be self-correcting. We tell ourselves that perhaps the employee is going through a tough time, or there are some external forces outside the organizational concern, and if we just wait it out, this performance issue is going to go away, and they'll return back to adequate performance levels. Finally, we feel that employees should know better and self-correct. Oftentimes what I see when I talk to organizations about performance management is illustrated in the graphic that I'm about to show you. I believe it is only on rare occasions that we see performance drop significantly and over a short period of time. If we do see this drop, it is usually predicated on a previous slow decline. So quite normally what we see is an initial slow erosion in performance. And the initial dip below acceptable performance in any area is always at first slight. Oftentimes there's no formal correction because organizational objectives have not been compromised. It's just a small annoyance. The underperformance at this point is compensated by other members of the team or the managers themselves. And within this threshold event activity, the employee sometimes will correct on their own initiative. Other times, the performance continues to suffer and the rate of decline accelerates. However, as performance begins to decline and become more apparent, we start to see frustration from the manager and team members most directly associated with that staff member. As performance continues to decline, it begins to have a noticeable effect on organizational objectives. It is usually only at this point that many managers begin to contemplate disciplinary action. So by the time the manager engages in any type of performance discussion, they're not happy with the individual and are really only seeking to buoy the individual's performance back to a level where it does not affect organizational objectives. This may not necessarily mean they are bringing the employee back to acceptable performance, just getting them back to a level that does not involve compromising organizational objectives. It's really a solution to the immediate problem. What we end up doing in this case, oftentimes, is redefining our level of acceptable performance for the employee. As we repeat this process a few times, soon we find our frustration increases, and the only thing we're interested in or would like to consider is termination. As you can see in this graphic that I've put up for you, the bar for acceptable performance has dropped. Basically what we've said is they're just not capable of this anymore. We're just going to move it down. But what doesn't change is supervisor frustration and, in fact, organizational frustration. And also this threshold event activity, the distance between when their performance affects organizational objectives and when it's just a minor issue, narrows as well. And so what we find is the employee has a lot shorter path to the ultimate end of most performance issues, which is subversion. And this reminds me of an experience of a contemporary of mine he was telling me about only recently. I'm going to call him Rick for the sake of this webinar. And Rick had been working for the past 3 years in a small firm, had good performance reviews, felt like he was doing a good job. He had a few issues with dealing with external clients, but each time he was told that he had the support of his manager. Then, one Wednesday, his manager called him in and expressed great frustration. Rick had been getting to the office late, and he was told he should be coming in on time. 2 days later, Rick was terminated. When Rick was terminated, he was shown that his performance over the past 4 months had depreciated in the eyes of his employer, and he was no longer needed. Within 72 hours, Rick went from believing that he was doing an okay job to terminated. While this example is extreme, it is real. Did Rick have performance issues? Yes. At that time, did Rick have to be terminated? Probably. Could termination have been avoided? Most likely. I imagine that Rick's manager had a conversation with his boss that went something like this. Hello, Rick's manager. I've noticed Rick is never here on time, and you need to deal with that. Now, Rick's manager is mad because he or she got called out, and now for a performance issue of an employee,